Hi, I'm Julia Minamata. I'm the game developer behind The Crimson Diamond, and you are listening to the Scene World podcast.
It's the Scene World podcast. My name is AJ, and I am on the wrong camera because my normal camera is not working well. So I'm washed out today. But that doesn't that doesn't stop the fact that that's Jurg over there.
Exactly, and I'm hopefully not washed out.
On a very nice camera. No, because you have a shiny new camera.
Yeah, not new because we had that in the last intro already, but
newer than the one that you were using before, which was old.
Well, it was the Z920C from 2015. So
yes.
Now I have the Prio.
Yeah.
Which is a 4K camera actually.
Yeah, and this is the Scene World podcast, and I'm using the built-in FaceTime camera on my Mac because we are getting unreasonable choppiness with my normal webcam, which I cannot explain. But in a minute, we'll be talking to
Limited Run Games.
Thank you. And before we do that, though, I believe we have some news.
Yes. Well, I got four of them.
Okay.
I don't know how many news items you've got, but I've got four.
I have one.
Okay.
It's kind of a biggie, but I will.
You got pregnant.
No.
That's not it. Okay.
It is vintage is the new old.
Yeah.
Will be shutting down.
Really? Wow,
yes.
That's big.
So I guess that they did a contest, a writing contest. The vintage is the new old 2023 writing contest, and I guess that some people that did not win were very not nice, and wrote some very, very angry letters and whatnot, and were very sore losers. And so the Paolo, the guy who runs Vintage is the New Old, said that he's been thinking about it for a while, but after 9 years of blogging and publishing news, Vintage is the New Old will cease to exist at the end of this month, which is July.
Wow, which is massive because it was the biggest news portal in the retro world.
It's one of my two go-tos when I'm looking for news for this podcast to do this. You know, like usually the first thing I put in is Vintage is the New Old, because they have very good coverage of multiple different systems and scenes and everything. It's a good aggregate source for a lot of that stuff, and to see them go because of mostly due to the sore losing of some jackasses that entered a writing contest and didn't win. Like, I mean, that's I understand the decision to shut it down because that's a toxic environment, but it is a big loss to the retro community.
I mean, there is this other side, Indie Retro News, and Indie Retro News always hated Vintage is the New Old.
Yeah.
So they have been enemies. And for the reason that I'm publishing our news on Vintage is the New Old, they totally ignored Scene World News in Indie Retro News.
Yeah.
Even if I would send it in, never would anything we release at news be published. Well, that means we will have to find other ways Or perhaps I reboot C64 TV.
Yeah.
I mean, I got the domain, I got the website. Perhaps I should update it and
why not?
Restart it. Because, well, I mean, I think it was the year before last year C64 SK stopped, or was it a few years earlier? I don't know.
Not sure.
But it's not but it's not the first portal actually stopping. Let's see, C64 SK. When did they stop? They stopped 4th May 2021.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's actually the second news portal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a biggie because it was the biggest one.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was more than one person working on it. I mean, that's there were, aside from, Paulo's the guy that was running it, that is shutting it down, that announced it. But there was, I guess there were at least 3 other people that contributed, and I mean, it's
we interviewed one of them. John did a few years back.
Yeah. And I guess also that the writing contest also had a low number of contributions. Like, there was little interest in it. It was posted. We'll put a link to the announcement blog post so that you can read it yourself. But
wow,
there wasn't, the quality was good, but there was a lack of interest from the community. And
wow, some of the quoted reactions. I'm not interested in your price, mate. I take my story off your website. Go F yourself. And you bias judge too.
Yeah.
Wow. Remove my story from your piece of ass website. Wow.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
While at the same time belittling some of the other stories that were published on the site. Saying at least my work was structured like a story. But, I mean, as a writer, the stories things don't need to be structured. Like if your main complaint was that the other ones didn't use grammar or structure properly, that's stupid, because that's not how writing works.
I'm also considering submitting my database to Internet Archive so they can there are other ways to keep the articles alive.
Yes.
After the site is gone. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, there will be smaller sites coming up, or there will be a fusion of a couple of new sites to grow bigger. We will see what happens.
And their Twitter account will still exist. They said they're not getting rid of the Twitter account, so there may still be, not full-blown blog posts and things like that, but maybe they will still aggregate some news stuff. That would be nice. That would be nice, because it's it's such a niche community to begin with, and then to see strife like that and see people leave because of that kind of strife is kind of, it's disheartening to me, because I feel like we're all kind of in this together. Like I sell stuff on eBay, and if I sell Commodore stuff, it always goes smoothly. There's rarely ever people that suck in the retro community. But
we met a few, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, we have met a few, and that's the unfortunate part, is that the few are the really loud ones. And they make life difficult for a lot of people. So Well, we
Anyway,
wish all the best to everyone from Vintage is the New Old, and we're sorry to see you go. And yeah, we love you guys. So
you're very American way.
Yes. So ignore the sore losers.
Anyway, on the brighter side, we have some other news.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the most welcoming news is the Unistore joystick is back. The project revived.
Didn't we talk about that last podcast, last intro?
I'm not sure. I think we didn't talk about the details because they just released the details on their Kickstarter.
I think you may have said something about it's coming back, but we didn't actually.
Yeah. Well, I told it to you personally, but we didn't mention it in the news. That might be true as well. Because that was after our last episode was released.
People don't realize also that when Jurg and I, when we talk, this is when we talk. Like we'll text each other occasionally, but like when we sit down and actually like talk and have a conversation, it's usually like the podcast, the news section is when we're just hanging out and talking.
The others is just WhatsApp, and if shit is hitting the fan, then usually it's phone calls.
Yeah, we'll have an occasional phone call, but that's usually when something bad happens. But when we just catch up regularly, that's what you're watching here. It's just us talking. It's just bullshitting.
Yeah. So Marcin, who we spoke to, actually bought all the shares from the company. So
okay.
This way he kicked out the one person who didn't do anything with the company and halted the project. Yeah.
That's one way to fix it.
Yeah. So, So, of course, everybody was happy on Kickstarter to hear that. So,
yeah.
Well, now we can use the promo that we recorded during the interview in a proper way, because as you guys probably remember, I used both promos we recorded as part of the news section where we announced that the project is on a hold because of team differences internally. And it was like, let's use it in the news section before we don't use it at all.
Yeah.
So now we can actually use it proper.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yes. And also John Drew, who we also spoke to.
Jim Drew,
who we also spoke to from the C64 keycap project Indiegogo.
Yes.
He actually is now sorting out all the keycaps and shipping out the orders finally.
Nice.
Yeah. Because he did only a few, and then he went in discussions and troubles with the injection mold company. And yeah. And now that he has to do the shipping all by himself, he actually put up a way of donating to him if you want to contribute, but that's totally on freelance basis because all backers already paid for everything.
Yeah.
He
makes other stuff too. Like this isn't the only thing that Jim Drew produces, but
yeah,
Jim Drew is a well-known name within the C64 scene, and we've had him on before.
Yeah,
obviously talking about the keycaps, but he's done other stuff as well. So he has an infrastructure in place for that kind of thing.
That's true.
So that's nice to know that that's actually getting done, because that was a biggins was the keycaps.
Yeah, especially since the Austrians from Phase 5 didn't ever deliver. And I bought like 5 sets.
Was it just them? There was somebody else that was making keycaps, and
no, it was just them.
Okay, who?
Nobody else did keycaps for the C64.
I was seeing something about keycaps, and they were bad. Like they didn't the lettering wasn't in the right spots, and
Those were the first batch from Jim Drew.
Oh, okay. I get mixed up. There's so much stuff that we're trying.
No, there's only just 2 projects about the keycaps.
No, but I'm saying, but there's so many different things that we go through. But we're looking at this stuff because there's Amiga keycaps and there's every other platform.
I don't pay attention to Amiga stuff.
I do.
So. Yeah, well, you do, but I don't.
I do.
Yeah. Nice. Anyway, other news is, we didn't mention it, but Street Fighter 6 has been released on June 2nd. We totally missed that the last time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And also, Jacked Alice 3 was released on July 14th.
What?
Jacked Alice 3 was released on July 14th. Jacked Alice 3 is a very known retro IP. It's round-based strategy game.
Well, but I'm just not understanding what you're.
Jacked Alice.
Jacked Alice.
Jacked Alice 3.
That's a new one. I'm gonna look it up.
Well, it's a game from the 90s, so.
I'm seeing Denim Jackets, but.
Jacked Alice. Or probably I'm pronouncing it wrong. Jacked Alliance, perhaps?
Jagged Alliance. Okay.
You say jacket? Really? Not jagged?
Yes, jagged.
You say jacket? Okay.
That's how it's pronounced, yeah. I was seeing jacked like Jacked.
So it's actually say jagged. Okay, jagged.
like jacked out, like some chick named Alice that's real jacked.
No.
That's what I was like, and then Jagged Alliance. Okay, Jagged Alliance 3. That's okay. I was seeing denim jackets for sale on Google under Jacked Alice, and then I'm like, what?
And it's original a game from 1994. So
yeah.
So it's definitely a retro game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
1994.
Well, I mean,
seems like it was yesterday.
The Embracer Group doing everything, I mean, they took over, 3D RAMs. They took over THQ Nordic. Well, THQ Nordic is a part of the Embracer Group, always was. Well, in this episode, Limited Run Games has been bought by Embracer Group.
Really?
Yes. So I'm like, who are EA again? And Activision Blizzard and Ubisoft. Embracer Group is like the Swedish people are becoming the biggest people in the game industry.
They are.
Yeah.
They
And I mean, even the German stuff. I mean, Koch Media, which actually changed name to PlayOn a few months ago. They also were bought by Embracer Group.
Wow.
So
I'm looking at this thing. This the amount of things that they have. They've got Amplifier Game Invest, CD Entertainment, Coffee Stain Holding, Gearbox.
Yeah. I know.
Saber Group.
I know.
THQ Nordic. Deca.
I know.
Dark Horse Media. That's the Dark Horse Comics.
I know. The Embracer Group is like the name is program here. They embrace everything. Yeah.
Yeah, really. They envelop everything. They're like just a blob that just they're an amoeba that just goes around everything.
I know.
Digests them.
They are what EA used to be.
Yeah, they've got Aspire, 3D Realms.
I know. And the funny thing is, like, when I got in touch with PlayOn because of Sonic, the new Sonic release, they were like, "Do you want us to put you in the PR newsletter? I mean, we already have your contact data from the other publishers that are part of Embracer Group." I'm like, "Yeah, sure, add us up." Yeah.
Yeah, they don't own Electronic Arts. They purchased unsold stock from larger video game companies like Electronic Arts, but Electronic Arts is still its own thing, I believe.
I know, it's sure.
Yeah. They themselves have a ton of things. I mean, they own Maxis and Motive and PopCap and.
Anyway, so it's good that we have good connections to the Embracer Group.
Yes.
Yeah. To 3D Realms and THQ Nordic and PlayOn and all those publishers.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and other news is that's the last one I'm having. Overtake, the racing community that we interviewed a couple of months ago together with the race department, is now hiring and has offering a few freelancer and full full-time paid,
right.
So full-time positions, freelancer positions, and volunteering positions. So I mean, that makes sense since race department and Overtake agreed to start a cooperation. Now the thing is bigger, and they need more people to work with.
Yeah.
So that would be my news, and so I would say, let's jump to limited run games in a not so limited interview.
Let's do that. Nope.
Awesome. Today, we are talking to two guests, and with me today is Dennis again.
Hi.
For helping me with the tough questions. Today, we are talking to limited run games in the person of returning Dimitris, Giannakis, and Joe Modzeleski. I wrote some note here, and you are considered an LRG veteran, and you are leader of the Carbon team, which Dimitris is also a part of.
Yes, I've been working at the company for over 5 years. So I was here, I think I was employee number 13 or 14 when the company was still quite young. So I've been here for a lot of its growth and know a lot of the ins and outs. And I'm the development director for the company, so I oversee the Carbon team and also all internal kind of actual game development projects.
Awesome. So, I mean, the thing is, normally we ask, where did you get in touch with computers and video games first? I mean, it's kind of repetitive for Dimitris because we already asked him that. But Joe, you could start. How did it work out for you? What was your first touching point?
So I was super young. This is kind of part of the story. But I grew up kind of poor. So a lot of the stuff in my household was a generation older than I am. I look older than I am. I'm 34 years old. I was born in '88. So you would think I'm of the generation that grew up with like Super Nintendo and stuff. But the first time we had any sort of computers or tech like that in the house, we got a hand-me-down NES in 1991. So I was 3 years old. And we also had an Apple II, which I have extremely minimal like memories of. Like I have these tactile memories of using the floppy drive for it, but I don't really remember much of the actual Apple II. I just know that we had it for a while. So NES was like the first big one for me. And then a few years later, when I was like maybe 5 or 6, we got a Windows 3.1 machine, and I started playing around with a lot of DOS games and kind of everything spiraled from there. But for me, it's 3 years old. We started having stuff like this in the house. It was always older tech, but it's been a mainstay in my life ever since.
Which is interesting because this actually, I'm 41. This is how I started. My first game console was an NES, and I started out with the Commodore 64. So, yeah. So that's quite interesting. And when I got my first one, 1990, the C64 was also considered old. But
oh yeah, 1990. The C64 was ancient by 1990.
Yeah, exactly.
Even the Amiga was almost on the way out at that point. So that's quite a while.
Well, what people didn't know.
Cool. I think it's cool to have like, you know, some bit of actual personal affinity for hardware and technology that is from before your own time.
Well, what people didn't know at that time is that the company Commodore was also on the way out slowly. Well, well, so how did it start to happen that you got hired at LRG, Limited Run Games, 5 years ago, you said? How did that happen then?
So I was familiar with LRG as soon as they started. I was a customer of theirs pretty early on. I missed the first couple titles because they sold out really fast. But
5 minutes or something,
yeah.
If I remember correctly. I was like, oh my God, they can't be serious about that.
They used to go really fast, yeah. But I actually was a partner of Limited Run back in 2017. In 2017, I was a partner of theirs because I was hired in 2018. We put out one of my games on PlayStation 4. It was called Super Gun World 2. And at the time, I was also doing contract work, doing console ports of people's Game Maker games, because there was kind of an absence in the Game Maker community of people who had console development experience. So I got a lot of work doing stuff like that. They had some stuff that they had kind of talked about bringing me on for contract work, that, you know, they had some other devs who had Game Maker games that they needed ported to PlayStation and ported to Vita at the time. And that conversation just kind of spiraled into just offering me a job. So I came in at the time to oversee ports internally, like help on all kinds of ports, not just through Game Maker, but Unity ports and stuff. And provide help to developers. I think my title for most of my early time at Limited Run was just developer support. So for a period of time from 2018 to I'd say sometime in like 2021, literally every game that Limited Run put out, like the physical published games, those passed through me to go through the conversion process to be resubmitted and converted to physical. So yeah, I touched all of our products for a really long time. And I worked on all of our ports, things like the FMV games, Corpse Killer. There's some RPGs I did, like the Z-Boyd games I did to Switch and PlayStation 5 and stuff. So for a long time, that's kind of what I did until I passed that off, because it's just the development responsibilities were just getting a little too ambitious. So yeah, I found myself in here because there was just a hole that they needed filled with somebody to help all the developers go through this, because the company was growing. And I just happened to be a guy that was self-motivated and knew how to do console ports. I'd been shipping to console on my own. So
it's very interesting you mentioned in Gunworld. I think now you mention it, I think I worked with you some years ago. I put your games in one of a game bundle. I worked for a company called Groupies a couple of years ago. Do you remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I know that Gunworld, probably Gunworld 2, ended up in quite a few Steam bundles. Yeah,
definitely. So yeah, it's pretty fun. I think I worked with you a couple of years ago.
It's a small industry.
You know what I mean? Really is.
There's so many people in video games, but like there's always stories like that I hear about where people connect with each other and they didn't really realize at the time, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Gunworld was a game which was pretty much inspired by some Nintendo Entertainment stuff. Now that you mention it, that it was your first console, it makes absolutely sense. And so I think, yeah, that's pretty authentic. Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
cool.
That was very much kind of what I was going for with that first game. It was very much like NES. It was around the same time that like Shovel Knight was being kickstarted and came out too. So it was kind of the right time for a lot of those things. Everyone was starting to do this NES inspired thing.
Definitely. Cool. Yeah.
I mean, we spoke about it briefly, but not in very much intense. How was it for you, Dimitris? I mean, you mentioned in your first interview that you worked for Limited Run Games as a freelancer once, as a contractor.
Yeah, contractor. Yeah.
Yeah. But how did it actually happen that you now decided to move there full time? I think you even relocated for them, right?
Well, no. I did move house last year. I actually moved further away from the main
further
office.
away even.
Yeah, he made it more difficult.
Yeah, it made it more difficult actually. I guess the reason why Jorg is, look, I really love what I do at LRG. I mean, and I think it was just the right time to make a move. So to be completely honest, I was in a situation where I was at the time, like 18 months ago, I was working freelance or contracting, whatever you want to call it, for both LRG and for Night Dive Studios. So I had two kind of different things going on. So I was kind of working on, the Quake remaster and stuff for Night Dive, and I was working on, River City Girls Zero for LRG at the time, and I always really wanted to kind of step away a little bit because I felt like I had so much work on my plate, and not to mention the YouTube channel as well, which I kind of do on as like the side hobby thing that I like to do. So I was in a situation where I was just overworking, to be honest. I was really in a spot where I mean I loved what I was doing, but I realized that I had to give something up, so Joe's been bugging me, pretty much since day one. Join up full time. It's a good company. We take care of our people, and I always knew that they were a good company and they took care of their people. That I didn't need really that reassurance, but it just kind of got to a point last year where I was like, you know what, I'm ready. Things are happening. We've got a bunch of games that have been signed, so our pipeline is pretty much full for the next couple of years with games that we're working on. So I thought, this is it. This is the time to jump on board full time. So that was really about it.
I mean, my problem is sometimes I feel like I need a second job to buy all those collector items. I mean, recently I was like, damn, Trip World, Loom, Zack McCracken, Maniac Mansion, all those games. I'm like, wow, this would be awesome. So actually, I got around here. So anyway, that's actually one of our questions we had is, how did you decide which games are actually limited run games? What is the process on that?
So as far as just like any limited run published title, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, how do you decide for, let's see, Loom? Or just recently, I got the anthology of Monkey Island, for example. I mean, you can actually take any random title, but there must be a thought process behind it or something, I guess.
I wish I could tell you that there is a very strict process that we go through, but it's not really like that. And honestly, the process has changed so many times over the past 5.5 years. Because the company has grown a lot, so we have a lot of diverse tastes in the company of who's interested in what, who can vouch for what, right? I think what it really comes down to, though, if we kind of boil the last couple eras of limited run together, it comes down to kind of something that somebody here at the company is really passionate about and can make an argument for. That's something that we'll look into. There's also a lot of developers who come to us. So there's we're getting to a point where some AAA publishers are reaching out to us. A lot of indies reach out to us because they want to work with us. So that's a way that a lot of titles get chosen. And then we have a lot of repeat partners, people that we've been working with for years, putting their titles out. It's on the small end of people like Zboyd, putting out all of their RPGs and stuff like that, to greater titles like we've worked with Bethesda and stuff like that. So. We've worked with Disney, and we've gone back and worked on multiple properties with them. So it's kind of like those three things combined. It's either somebody in the company is really excited about something and they make a big argument for it. We've got people that are always kind of sniffing around at the latest stuff in indie games to try and see what's out there, what looks interesting, what looks like it could use some sort of a boost or some help getting through. And then there's just people that reach out to us, repeat partners. We're kind of just starting to get into this more traditional publishing relationship with developers as well, where we're starting to do original titles here that either are pitched here to different developers, or developers pitch to us. Like something like RZ is a good example of a whole new avenue of how a limited run game happens, and that like RZ did not exist before us. Like that's something that we funded and published in a more traditional sense. So there's a lot of different ways that something ends up a limited run title. It's a very, very fluid, very different process on a per title basis.
Interesting that you mention Disney, because I remember in 2017 we had Ron Gilbert, and he was like, Disney will not allow me to make any Monkey Island ever again. He even quoted that in his trailer for the latest Monkey Island. So seeing that even Ron Gilbert didn't believe himself that Disney would allow anything to happen further with Monkey Island, it must have been pretty difficult to get this anthology together, no?
I actually don't know what the process was for getting the anthology together. I basically just handled the parts of that came across my desk that I had to handle, and that was about it. So as far as like the deal and negotiations for that, I can't speak to the complexity of it. But I can kind of use it as a segue to speak to the fact that the founder, Josh Fairhurst, he has an exceptional skill at getting through licensing problems. He is very, very good at managing impossible deals that many other companies or many other publishers just don't even bother to touch because they think they can't happen. Things that where things are caught up in licensing hell between 4 or 5 different companies and nobody's even sure who owns what. He's proven to be very good at not only following all those leads, but getting everybody in communication with each other and coming to some sort of amicable deal. So my guess is that the Monkey Island project was something similar to that, where there was just a lot of conversations that needed to be had, but I can't speak to it in any real detail.
So what do you think? How long does it take from one idea of a project to release date? Is there a fixed time frame you have for projects, or
no? It's just as fluid as everything else, right? It's based on the complexity of the product. It's based on the complexity of the negotiations and the deal, and it's based on the size of the partner we're working with. Sometimes there's smaller titles that communication moves really quickly, and we have pretty standard publishing deal, and everything can be done in like 6 months. However, there's other times where we have these complicated collector's editions we do with partners that we have a lot of approval processes we have to go through, so things can be quite slow. You have approval processes that can take maybe sometimes 6 months on their own, and then the manufacturing process for some of the items can be sometimes up to a year.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Which has been a learning process. A lot of things. I know a lot of people got sick of hearing it for the longest time, but 2020, the pandemic really screwed up manufacturing for a lot of people, manufacturing and shipping and things. So we're still feeling that. There was a time in 2019, early 2020, where we could tell you, oh, this thing is going to take us 7 months to make, and it took a year and a half because timelines have completely screwed up. And even now in 2023, we're still finding that things have not gone back to what they were like in 2019. So, I can't speak into complete detail on production timelines because I don't work in the production department. But the basic answer is it's a big variable, and we still are narrowing things down because of how volatile production is, post-COVID, still is 3 years later.
So that means that you are planning way ahead. Like I think Dimitris, you mentioned that you have a pipeline for the next couple of years already. So
that's just Carbon titles as well, not everything else. There's obviously a lot of things outside of the Carbon engine games. Some of them that you saw on the LRG3 presentation last week as well, if you caught that. But yeah. I'm just talking about the Carbon titles. So
yeah,
there's quite a lot of stuff going on.
The Carbon team, the development department in general, it's kind of funny. Limited Run had this very grassroots startup kind of feel for years, and just when we got big enough that it didn't fully feel that way anymore, we really hit the ground running with Carbon, and it created almost this small grassroots vibe inside of the company as this isolated little side part again. So the Carbon stuff is completely isolated from the traditional limited run title.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Where do you make the differentiating? What's the difference between, as I said, classical titles and Carbon titles?
So a traditional limited run published title, a traditional title would be something like what you've been seeing from us since 2015. It's a title that we are not the digital publisher for. We are just the physical publisher and distribution partner. Obviously, that's still the bread and butter of our business. So most of our titles are like a traditional limited run title. The differentiator beyond that is, the Carbon stuff. We obviously brand and market Carbon as a brand, so we can make it clear to people. This is something we put a lot of work into, and it's something that's done in-house. And we're still in talks or how we're going to communicate or brand originally published content, like say Arzette or Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, which is something that is developed internally. Like there's still ongoing conversations about how exactly we're going to brand or market those to differentiate it, but it is a conversation we're having.
So actually, I'm asking you a hard question. As I said, the wording is not yet clear about how to market that.
Yeah, it's just that there's a lot of different options, and we we still have a very grassroots feel here, despite the growth of the company. So like we can sometimes take a long time to really narrow down what we really want. We'll kind of back and forth between 3 or 4 different ideas until the 11th hour, and we're like, okay, now this is what we're going with, right? So we have a couple different approaches we can take to how we market that content. But I can't speak for our marketing department. I can't speak for Josh.
Sure.
But there's a lot of things you have to consider. One of them being, how do we communicate these different titles in a way that doesn't make them seem superior to a traditional limited run title, right? Like you have to be conscious about how you market or brand titles that are original in a way that doesn't make it seem like they are like the premium, the premium limited run title, and the traditional limited run title is somehow inferior, right? Like there's a lot of things you have to consider about how that kind of branding will be interpreted before you put a stamp on it and say this is what we're going with.
Right. You mentioned it in a side sentence, collector's editions. And here's something that actually happened, I think, last year, and it kind of backslashed a bit on social media, and that is why I wanted to ask about it. And there are games that have different collector's editions from different companies, like yours and yours including. So, for example, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. I remember the problem was that you were the first announcing it on Twitter, and people from outside of US pre-ordered. Just a few weeks later, it was actually announced also that another company, Signature Edition, I think it was, does a European release. So I wonder why sometimes are games released by different, well, you would say collector edition companies, not yours exclusively, and why not communicating it clearly in advance, saying like, hey, if you are from Europe, hold your horses. In a few weeks down the road, you can get it without VAT import and taxes from another company. And also, I think it's weird, isn't that kind of a problem if a product is not only available at your place, but also at a competitor, at the competition? So I wonder, how does such things work? That's like super weird.
That's both a lot to unpack, and also the answer is probably more simple and less interesting than you're hoping for. But really, it comes down to we have a relationship with the publisher. So, like for Turtles, for example, we have a relationship with .mu or whoever it's going to be, and our relationship with them is the only thing that we're privy to. So, and I know that probably doesn't sound as interesting as you would hope for an answer, but like we are not always privy to whatever the negotiations or publishing deals are with competitors or people from other regions, and there's just sometimes that we just don't know. We put out Turtles and we know that we are the North American ESRB publisher for this title, but there are times when it even surprises us that there have been instances where a European or a Japanese collector's edition or limited release or publishing agreement happens and it goes up before ours. And we are just as surprised, like where there's been an issue. I forget exactly which game it was, but there was a point where there was like 3 weeks before our title went up, it went up in another region, and we literally didn't even know that that version was going to happen. So again, I wish there was a saucier reason. even if there was, I wouldn't be able to tell you what it is. But the reality is, sometimes there's information that we just don't know because it's not relevant to us. We are the partner for the ESRB territory, and that's the only part that we need to worry about.
Interesting. So it's actually
some partners are giving multiple licenses to different regions.
Yeah, well, because I mean, like when you consider a big title like something like Turtles, right? Like in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense that you would have a different distribution or publishing partner for each territory. So I mean, that's how a lot of game deals were handled back in the day. There's a lot of titles that were handled by completely different publishers in different territories because these companies know their territories better than anyone else, and
definitely.
So we focus on the ESRB territory.
Did you know Konami did Amiga games in the US back in the day? Did you know that? Because I only found that out like when I started looking at my big box Amiga collection. Like there's Konami branding on games like Gods from the Bitmap Brothers.
Wow.
Like they also did Frontier as well. Konami did that. I mean, it's crazy. If you go back and look at some old games, look at the publishers that were in various countries. It's very, 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 very eye-opening and surprising in many ways.
Interesting. So speaking of that, did you ever been thinking about, I don't know if this is the right question for a developer like you, but if limited run games should open another office in Europe or in Asia, or did you ever been thinking about this as a company? What do you think?
Yeah, so like you're gonna hear this you're gonna hear this from me a lot, I suppose. But again, I am not in that part of the company, so I'm not part of those decisions. But I am involved with conversations. I hear conversations. I kind of know where the company's going, even if I'm not the one involved in those decisions, right? And the idea of expanding out of the U.S. has been a conversation for years. There's already in Japan, there's Super Deluxe, which has been the result of us trying to work in Japan and stuff like that. So the conversation's always there. And we were recently acquired, last year by Embracer. Obviously a strong foothold in Europe there. So the conversations are always happening, and if we make an expansion into Europe, it'll be, when we feel we have the right resources to do it, and it makes sense. It's a space that we feel we can provide something in, right? We're not going to do it just to do it. We got to feel like we can provide something there that's going to make sense to the people that buy from that territory and is going to be a better experience for them.
I see.
I mean, at least you are not fails advertising like some years back when I Am 8-Bit were like, we are closing down our UK department. Don't worry, for you guys outside of the US, nothing will change, and the prices of the games doubled for people outside of US, and it was like, oh sure, nothing changes, So totally fine there. Now let's talk a bit about the development side. I mean, is there something like in limited run game, is there like a strategy to say if you release or if you re-release an old game, if you say we make it as original as possible, as it was meant to be played, or if we, let's say, build an emulator around it or improve it, or what's actually the I would say philosophy of limited run games regarding re-releases?
So I guess I got to ask you a question to make sure I answer your question properly. Do you mean re-releases in general to stuff that we publish, or do you mean like as far as just all internally developed stuff? How do we manage that?
I mean, things that you publish. Let's say, for example, let's say, well, for example, let's take the Loom release, the upcoming Loom release. I mean, for the Loom game, we know there is an EGA version without audio. There is a very rare talkie version on CD, and
so
different platforms.
I've got a better idea what you're asking
but on when you sell the games on your shop, you are not very detailed on what kind of edition of the game the customer is actually getting. So when I bought the Monkey Island anthology, I found out what I'm getting when I got it. Not at once.
So,
and I was like, is there some? Then there must be some strategy behind it, you know.
So generally, what we do for a lot of titles like that, something like Monkey Island, if there isn't already like some sort of remaster in the works, right? When we do a retro re-release, we release it in its original format, and we try to be as comprehensive as we can. And that can come down to a lot of things, whether or not we can source original versions in every different release that it had, or if there's any licensing hangups over any specific version that might prevent us from putting it back out. But generally what we try to do is re-release it back in its original form, or, you know, whatever its best form was. There have definitely been times we certainly have had lapses in communication before, where the communication between what it was that we were putting out and what it was that the marketing department was putting together on our website didn't quite match up because there's a miscommunication of some kind, or there were people involved in putting the title together that like weren't as familiar with what it was. And I'll say like things like that happened during this period of time we had that was, I would say, between 2020 and the beginning of 2023, like late 2020, early 2023, or late 2022 rather, that we had a lot of stuff going on, and our manufacturing pipeline got severely stretched out. So we took on way more work, and this has been discussed recently. We kind of, you know, have talked a little bit more transparently. We took on a little bit more work than we should have, and it did lead to things where some titles got overlooked a little way as far as how they're being described, right? Which is something that we have, you know, adjusted for. You make plans, you change, and it just takes time for everything to catch up. But the amount of attention that's being placed on a per title basis now is more than we were able to do during, you know, that period of time where we were just kind of buried, right?
I mean, you have Dimitris now. He is a historian, so he would be easy. Dimitris is like, hey, there is this rare version of this game.
Actually, I want to give a shout out to Audie, our producer, because he's really, really good at that stuff. Like he'll dig deep and uncover all sorts of things that I either, number one, I completely forgot about, or number two, I didn't even know existed. So having people like that on the team and at LRG that basically, you know, these historians that basically just dig through the archives and find interesting things is really, really cool.
Well, and that team has expanded. You know, for a while there were so few people at the company that really, really knew the retro stuff. So it was people like Josh Fairhurst and myself, and we brought on Jeremy Parrish at a certain point. But Jeremy Parrish works on our book like the book writing wing, the, you know, press run. So he wasn't really involved in the products as we put them out, anyways. But bringing on Dimitris, bringing on Audie, as Dimitris, you know, mentioned, huge help in kind of giving more attention to some of the more retro stuff we put out. But we've just kind of been expanding out the amount of people who know about and care about those things, because we did have moments where things got miscommunicated because not everybody in the company is intimately familiar with all these different platforms and what we're putting out, what the differences are between each version. But the philosophy generally is to put out something that is exactly what it was, or as comprehensive as it can be. But the philosophy between what we publish is so limited based on what is available, what we can get licensing wise. The philosophy behind the things that we develop ourselves, like the Carbon things, is very different because we have a lot of agency over what that's going to be, and we're not as restricted by what other people have done or what we can get our hands on.
But I mean, word goes around. Once I interviewed Julia Minamata, who is an EGE expert, EGA expert. She's doing EGA adventures, and she was like, "Hey, LRG's Loom re-release has the EGA version in it, so you need to get that, So it is important for people, Even people who are working on retro titles nowadays, they are taking big pride in like having this release, knowing that this certain version of a game is in it.
It all goes back to people's memories and nostalgia and their experiences with the game. And, one of the things that we really, really want to do is make sure that they can relive those experiences. So if you had an old 286 with EGA graphics, you didn't have the 486 with the VGA. If there's a way to play that game in that mode, then, I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. So I wonder, a different question maybe. Let's say you are re-releasing a Genesis game or a Super Nintendo game, and you acquire a license for it from the original developer or something. Are you allowed to improve the game, like fix some frame rate issues or something like that? Are you allowed to do it? Do you want to do it? Or do you want to keep it as authentic as possible, like keeping the frame rate choppy? And what is your philosophy on this?
I'm going to let Dimitris answer this question too, but I'll say my base philosophy.
Yeah, I feel like
from the Carbon
I feel like
side.
you may have two different answers, which is good, right?
I think there's going to be an overlap. I'll say the very basic version of my philosophy here is we keep things as authentic as we possibly can. However, it is always worth exploring quality of life or modernizing something if we can do so in a way that does not compromise the integrity of the experience. Not just like compromise the game in any way, but like not just what you're looking at, but like what was the experience and feel of playing the game, and can you make adjustments to it that doesn't mess with that? As soon as you mess with that feeling, that's when I start to have a problem.
I agree with Joe. I think it's a very, very tricky question to answer because there's no real overarching response that we can give. But I think Joe's right. In almost every situation, we want to make sure that we provide the kind of experience that you had, when you played the game all those years ago. But having said that, we also want to make a really interesting and unique product as well, right? And if there are ways to enhance a game, then we will do so. And I think a great example is Trip World. You were kind of mentioning it earlier, Jorg. I mean, we've provided a full color, Game Boy Color DX version as well on the packaging. So that is an enhancement that you normally wouldn't really see with an old game like that, right? So I guess my answer is, we love to enhance games, but we also want to be very careful that we don't mess with the source material, right? Like we don't want to go in there and start messing with game logic or things like that, because that will feel different to someone that remembers how the game plays, right? So I personally, I can tell if something's been changed most of the time if it's a game that I remember, and usually it kind of doesn't put me off, but it's just like, oh, this is different. You know, I'm not sure if I like this as much. So I think, you know, if we do something like that, we're always very careful, and we'll usually have the original game on in the product as well, so you can enjoy. So, you know, with Trip World is a great example. We have the original DX version, just the DMG version, I should say, and then we have kind of the enhanced, you know, color version that is really, really exciting as well. So I think, you know, we like to do it when we can, and if we do, then we're going to make sure that we still have kind of the original content as well available.
You know, Dimitris, you touched on something that I kind of want to kind of jump off of. You said kind of you don't want to compromise that experience you had, you know, nostalgia-wise, like whenever you originally played the game, and you know, that's one half of it. The other half that I look at is, you know, how do you preserve the integrity of that game for people who are now experiencing it for the first time? Because they don't have the nostalgia part, right? So you can make more liberal changes to a game for those people because it's new to them anyways. But you still have to be very careful that whatever changes you do make, even if it's something that's a quality of life thing or makes a game more palatable to a modern audience, you have to always make sure you're doing it in a way that retains the same feel, the same vibe, or, you know, whatever connection that people would have had with the game that came out in 1991. We want to reproduce that now. Maybe there's things you can change about the game, like Trip World DX us doing the color, that makes the game a lot more palatable to people, because there's a lot of people that didn't grow up with the original Game Boy and they just don't want to play, you know, a monochrome game.
Yeah.
Right? But Trip World DX still evokes everything that was neat and interesting about Trip World, but in a way that some people wouldn't play it if we didn't provide like this color version, right? So they still have the same experience. We just provided them a new way of doing that isn't compromising in any way. And that's kind of what I think about with a lot of things. You know, like when we're able to take a game that we can add things like in-game maps or like, you know, quest trackers to games that didn't have them back when they originally came out. Those are things that I think you can add to a game that make it more palatable without, you know, ruining the experience. You know, we don't want to ask brand new players to start pulling out graphing paper and charting their own maps, because that's not a staple of playing video games in the 2020s. That was a staple of playing video games in the 80s and the 90s, or the early 90s, but that's not how people play video games now. So kind of adjusting the expectations of how the person's going to play the game, I think can help take something that feels really dated and make it feel more contemporary.
Here's a good question. The NES version of Maniac Mansion, I know that you put that up for pre-order as well. Does your re-release have the buffer battery for save games? Or did you modernize the technique in the NES cartridge for the NES release?
I don't
I
remember.
honestly don't know.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, because we don't manufacture the PCBs. I don't remember off the top of my head if the PCB for Maniac Mansion uses a battery or not.
It does. The original does. I know that because it was a pain to get that replaced.
Oh, no. I just meant for our new PCB.
Okay.
I don't know if it uses a battery or if it's using something more, you know, more permanent than a battery. So I don't know. We don't do. I'm not part of like the manufacturing side that orders those.
Too bad.
But I do. You know, the extent to which I touch our retro releases like that is just basically validating that the ROM is appropriate, and the test PCBs function on all the different variations of hardware we expect them to function on. And beyond that, I'm not involved with the actual like construction of those PCBs.
And also interesting that you mention Trip World. I mean, Trip World, if I'm not mistaken, is considered one of the 5 rarest Game Boy games. Mm-hmm. So the chance that most customers never ever played it is quite high.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, not a lot, but some of our carbon releases, and I'm not sure if this is something, and Joe may know more than me, but it's not, you know, like Shantae, our first carbon game, very, very expensive to get the original, you know, Game Boy Color version that Capcom published all those years ago. Trip World is another very, very sought after and rare game. I think, it's, and Joe, please tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like a lot of the Carbon titles that we do pick are games that are kind of sought after and rare and harder to find. And I think that's definitely one of the reasons why we want to bring them back and have them made available to a modern audience. So number one, if you did miss out all those years ago, if you don't want to pay exuberant eBay prices, you can have a chance to relive, the game physically as well. So I think it's definitely one of those things that we what we like to do is offer these games that, for whatever reason, you didn't get a chance to play back in the day unless you had an emulator and a ROM, a chance to to have a safe legal means to enjoy those games again.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, and it's not exclusively titles that are, expensive or rare or hard to get, right? I would say that like what we go after are things that we find to be notable or interesting in a particular way, and it just so happens to line up in a lot of ways that some of the more notable and interesting games that are highly desirable are ones that are also difficult to get. And solving that problem is huge. Solving the problem of accessibility is huge. We talk about this a lot internally, that this idea that something isn't necessarily accessible unless it's unless you remove as many obstacles as possible between the person who wants to play the game and their access to it. And for some people, well, I say for the majority of people, despite how popular and simple it is for a lot of us, emulation is just not an option for a lot of people. They just are not interested or willing to learn about that stuff. So for them, the lowest barrier of entry is, well, I want to be able to turn on whatever entertainment device is part of my household right now, part of my daily life, be that a PlayStation 5 or a Nintendo Switch or an Xbox or whatever. They want to turn on that device, they want to navigate to the store, and they want to just download a game. And that is the extent that those people are willing to go. And that is the vast majority of people who play video games. The overwhelming majority of people who play video games, because it's a huge, huge industry now. The overwhelming majority, that's the extent they're willing to go to play a game, is to navigate right to it from the dashboard of their game device and buy it. So meeting people there in that space is extremely important. You make the game very accessible for them. And you also get to do so in a way that curates the experience and make sure the experience that they're going to have is a good one, and it can't possibly be messed up by any amount of variables that they may not understand or may not care to understand.
I mean, it's good that you mention it, because in the recent month, if you looked at YouTube and actually search for feedback about limited run games, you got a bit of backlash in the last month, especially as I mentioned in one of my questions regarding the publishing strategy. Like, some people said, you do intentionally not tell people when a title is released in another region. So it's good that we have this interview now to put the record straight, because I think that the negative things always spread like a wildfire. One YouTuber is talking about it, then another YouTuber is talking about it and saying, yeah, I remember they published it and didn't tell anybody about it, and so I bought the more expensive release because of that. So it's super I think also difficult for limited run games, because now that there are many other companies also doing similar things like you do, like re-releasing old titles, people are more skeptical. Like, should I give my money to limited run games? Should I give it to somebody else? Are they doing multiple releases from different publishers intentionally? I don't know. It's is that also something you've noticed? Like the roughness of the community?
Yeah, we've certainly noticed it, right? And there's only so much I'm willing to say or respond to here because everyone has to understand as soon as I open my mouth, I'm speaking for the company, and and there's only so much I can really say because I am not the end all voice of this company. But we certainly pay attention to feedback. I kind of touched on this earlier. Negativity does spread um, like wildfire, and we certainly notice it. We respond to it. There's an extent to which we're able to be transparent with how we operate our business, and we know that there's ways we can be a bit more transparent in the future, and we're working on stuff like that. But as I touched on a little earlier, the reality is most of the reasonings behind some of the things that people get the most upset about are not as dramatic as you would actually think. I think to be a fly on the wall in this company, what you would find at the end of the day is just a lot of people that are extremely passionate and excited about the stuff that they do and just want to make really cool things and make things that people are really excited about and provide a cool service or product for those people, right? Because we are those people. 9 times out of 10, there's some sort of controversy or negativity around us, and it hurts us to see, because it's not at all what we're trying to provoke out of people. The reality is we're just a lot of humans that work here. Humans make mistakes, and it is what it is. But again, if you were a fly on the wall here, I think you'd find little to no controversy. You'd find that the answers to a lot of the things that have upset people are very, very mundane things. It's just nothing really going on,
I mean,
I guess like I said was the one that I covered with like the publisher thing, right? Like that's the best example I can give is that the answer is like we don't know. I know it's a good like a good story that like there's some sort of like we're withholding information or whatever, but like we're not the partner for Europe with that title, so we're the partner for SRB, and we didn't know.
I mean, people mostly jump to easy conclusions,
Well, and the thing of it is, this is me talking, not necessarily the company talking, but like the thing of it is, in any situation where you don't have 100% of the information and it's something that you feel passionate about, you're going to do what you can to either find the answer to whatever you're curious about, or you're going to deduce something on your own. And that's just a difficult side effect of like not being able to sit down 24/7 and talk to everyone about every possible inquiry they have,
True.
So like we can only be so transparent, both because we're all very busy and working all the time, so we can't spend 100% of our time with the community, and two, because sometimes there's NDAs or partner reasons why we just don't talk about particular things. We just kind of are doing our jobs and moving on with thing to thing.
What do you think, Dimitris? I mean, you as a rather new full-time employee of the company?
I agree with Joe. I mean, I think that, everyone here is very passionate about what they do. We're certainly not trying to undermine or get in a situation where we're setting ourselves up for, failure or controversy or anything like that. And also, I want to say that I go to events, conventions and stuff, and we get so much love and support from people when they come up to our booth, and it really just, I hate to say it, but sometimes you just need to go outside, you know what I mean? And just get out into the real world and meet people face to face and talk to the community and have them talk to you. I get so much love from everyone, when I go to events and at the LRG booth and stuff. There's so many awesome people. We were at GDC earlier this year, and man, we got so many people come up to our booth, and everyone was really, really excited about what we do. The carbon engine stuff was a hit. People loved it. They want to see more games. So I think that's really my response to that. It's something that we see it. We don't intentionally go out to to cause anything. And honestly, like I said, sometimes you just need to step outside and enjoy the real world.
Yeah, I've been traveling for the company, the entire time that I've been working here, the whole over 5 years that I've been here. I travel and do events a lot with the QA guy from my department. His name's Pete. We travel a lot to events, and I think I can count on like one hand, and this has been over the last nearly 5.5 years. I think I can count on like one hand the amount of times anybody has said anything even remotely negative to us in person. Like, we get a lot of positivity. I think just when you're online, a lot of negativity tends to raise to the top, and most people that are satisfied or happy with what you're doing, they don't feel like they don't feel like going online and venting about how satisfied they are, right? So a lot of that stuff is just kind of silent.
Also, pro tip, in such cases where you order the wrong version, it's possible to cancel pre-orders and order it again at another company in the worst case. So instead of complaining on Twitter and causing, a scandal, you also could say, okay, I made a wrong order. I just cancel it and pre-order it somewhere else, So the money is not lost already.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I see people are not always going to the easy solutions here, Yeah. Well, I mean, how is it for you, Dimitris, now that you are also, as you said, working with the company full time? Mm-hmm. Does it sometimes create conflict where you were like, oh, I would like to talk about it, I don't know, on my YouTube channel, for example, but I can't because...
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a very good question. I love to make content, as you know. And look, at the end of the day, if we're under NDA, which is almost always, then unfortunately I can't. But usually what will happen is when we can talk about something, it's always nice to make some content around it. And it's not, and I will also want to add that it's not anything that anyone has asked me to do. So like, Joe or Audio or anyone, they don't ask me, can you make a video about Trip World, for example?
More often than not, it'd be me telling you not to. Like, no, don't talk about something we're working on.
It's usually something that I want to do myself, or I may get a lot of people in the community saying, "Oh, this is a cool announcement. Can you talk about it? Or can you? I'd love to see a video of it when the game comes out." So, I guess I look at things, individually and make a determination as well. But yeah, look, it's an interesting. Dynamic, the overlap between kind of the YouTube stuff and the work stuff. But generally speaking, I like to keep both of those things separate where I can. I have a brand, so MVG is the brand. While it does have some overlap with LRG, of course, because, I do work in the Carbon team, most of the time I try to separate those things out and keep them individual.
Now, perhaps one more question regarding that. I've heard some feedback that you left your other job at Night Dive Studios in a hurry, and that is why the re-release was so bugged of Blade Runner.
Oh, you're talking about Blade Runner? No. So again, that's probably some type of internet, drama or internet. I don't know what the word is. Just some stuff that was made up to, I guess, just fit a narrative, to be honest. No. So the reason why I did leave Night Dive, I was pretty clear when I talked about it earlier, was I was just overworking. Like I was literally working 80-hour weeks. And I'm a 50-year-old man and I can't work 80-hour weeks, right? Like at 20, if I was in my 20s, yeah, sure, I probably could get away with it. But I could physically feel my body telling me I need to stop. I have to slow down because I'm in a situation where I'm just working so many hours and it's not good. It's not good for anyone, like to work that hard, right? So that was the main reason, honestly. When you get to my age, you really have to, and your body really starts to tell you, look, you're not in a good place here. You really need to just slow down. So that was really that's really the answer. Again, it's not really, it's not really a sexy answer, I guess, but it's the real answer. So
Okay.
I think that's like the running trend. Like I said, if you're a fly on the wall for a lot of these places, like the answer's not as interesting as whatever controversy is being spun. Most of the time, it's a really mundane, very digestible answer.
Yeah.
The internet blows up things pretty easily.
Yeah.
Like,
it can be amusing sometimes to see, just like trying to find the gaps that people filled in. But like, at the same time, I think what I said earlier really hits it. Like when you don't have 100% transparency, which you're not always going to get, people are inquisitive. They're going to fill in the blanks however they can manage to fill them in.
I mean, when I prepared for this interview and I was searching on Twitter and YouTube, I didn't expect so much scandals to be discovered by retro YouTubers, and like, let's ask them if this is really so big. But well, as I said, it's mostly blown out of proportion. So
yeah, I think the thing that kind of helps things like that spin and grow too is that as the company has grown, I would say our visibility as forward visibility as people has kind of receded. In the early years of the company, we were, I would say, a lot more approachable and available as people. We presented ourselves on camera and one-on-one with people a lot more often. And then as the company grew, we all got a lot more busy. I used to be on our Twitch stream literally every single day, interacting with the community every single day. At a certain point, my job just demanded I can't do that anymore. And whether there's a connection between this stuff or not, I certainly have noticed that as we became less like human and more of just a brand, our public perception also went down as well. Like whether those two things are related to each other. Listen, I don't work in marketing. I'm not a social media expert. I'm not a public relations expert.
Right.
I have no idea if those are related in any way, but it's certainly something that I wonder sometimes, is that what happened? We became less human and just a logo on a screen, and it made it easier for people to be mad at us for every little thing. I don't know, but this is something that I think we're trying to be mindful of going forward, is trying to get back out there and instead of letting people create a narrative about what it is we think and feel, trying to come out and tell them how we think and feel. And earlier this year, we showed that when we put out the first episode of a series we're doing now called Carbon Cast, that is kind of like a talking heads kind of thing that we can use to try and announce new games, talk about games we're working on, talk about the team and all this different stuff, right? I think things like that, I think the best way to combat, people making up what it is you think and feel or what your motivations are, is to just come right out and tell them face to face, these are my motivations, this is what we're interested in, this is what we're trying to do. So I know that's kind of spinning off from what you were talking about, but it is absolutely something we've noticed, the negativity and stuff, and we absolutely have noticed that we are less personable than we were in the past, and there's some things we want to try and do to change that.
How do you feel about your competition? I mean, we have, I am 8-bit, you have Strictly Limited, you have Signature Edition. There are so many companies sprung out, well, more or less doing what you are doing. Is that the reason why you made the second Carbon path now of limited run games?
No, they're
to
completely
differentiate
unrelated
from the others?
It's completely unrelated. Obviously we're a business, and the extent to which I'll really comment on anything on that is yeah, when you're a business, you have to grow, you have to change, you have to adapt, because you'll get stagnant and interest will disappear and stuff like that. But the thing that led to Carbon, well, actually, I'll answer your actual question, and then I'll spin off with the Carbon thing.
Sure.
The answer to your question is, at least my personal answer, is more competition, more competitors doing what we do. For me, really, it's nothing but validating. It helps you kind of know that you're onto something. If what is it imitation is the greatest form of flattery or whatever, right? To me, that's the extent of how I feel about it. There is space in this industry for competition. There has been from the beginning of it. And if anything, I'd say the best eras of this industry have been, born from competition, right? So it's, it's something that just feels validating. Now for the carbon thing, I guess what I can say about that is it's completely unrelated. And the carbon thing is more just a really nice example of what the culture at Limited Run is like. Because Limited Run is a place that encourages people to pursue projects and things that they're passionate about, and is more than willing to take risks and chances to provide resources to people if they feel like they have something really viable that they're passionate about. So the carbon thing really came from there. That's something that, like, retro games are a thing that I'm extremely passionate about. How they're re-released, presented, and stuff like that, the accuracy to it is something I'm extremely passionate about. I care a lot about, if somebody wants to replay a classic game. This is a really, really easy to go to example, but like if somebody wants to play a classic game and it comes back out on a modern system and the sound is broken or there's bad input delay on whatever that release is, right? Like that really hurts me, because now anyone who plays it is getting the wrong impression of the quality of that game based on a poor conversion or emulation or whatever it is,
or bad NTSC or PAL fixed released. Also, another thing that's like music playing too slow. Like, oh my god, are you serious?
So it's something I in particular am extremely passionate about, and that's what allowed Carbon to happen. It wasn't ever a conversation of like, what can we do that someone else isn't doing? It just never came from that. It was more just like, well, we have partners with back catalogs of titles that they can't do anything with, and we have people here at the company that are very passionate about retro games, and I had contacted MVG kind of on my own and put together the initial, like, okay, here's how I think we could do this, right? The conversation happened with Josh and I, and it was just a conversation between the two and I, just like, can we do something like this? And then I went out and solved for all the variables that we would need. We need, to bring on a programmer to do the emulation, and then we need a partner to do a title, and that was, Josh brought in Way Forward. We did Shantae, right? That was all just conversations based around what we're passionate about here. So no, I answered two completely different questions there. I'm sorry, but
it's all good. It's all good.
I will also want to add that even though they are competitors, I'm also a customer as well. So I have bought the Turrican collection. I have bought Strictly Limited games. I have bought, Cannon Dance and all these other releases. So I welcome it. If there's a game that's coming back that we don't have but someone else does, I'm still going to buy it. Like I'm all about it. I love retro games, and
Would I have loved if we published Tunic? Sure. But Tunic got published physically somewhere, and I bought it because I wanted that game. Like it's
exactly.
I mean, the good thing about limited run games is, at least as a non-US customers, you take care of everything. Customs is paid and so on. Everything is fine. It's coming in a wonderful bubble wrap or in a box that's very sturdy, so nothing arrives ever with an invoice because something wasn't paid in advance. Everything works fine, and the game is always in a superb condition. Another example, Strictly Limited, Turrican, as you mentioned it. Both Turricans that I bought for the Super NES, the Director's Cut edition, right? Both had dents in the boxes of the game boxes, but were inside bubble wrap in the box. So that means it was already put with a dent in the shipping box prior to shipping to me. And I was like, how can somebody from quality assurance say, that's fine, we are shipping it this way to our customer? Already knowing it's broken before I ship it. And that's something that never happened to me with limited run games,
We try, obviously, to make sure that nothing goes out damaged or whatever. I will say honestly, maybe this is me being crazy here, but I will say in defense of our competitors, it's a lot of work shipping and distributing games, right? So the idea that something could go through damaged, I certainly, just being in the position that I'm in and having experienced a lot of what we do, that's our warehouse is right back there, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah. I certainly know all the realities that can lead to something either leaving the warehouse damaged or being damaged on the way. So while I appreciate the sentiment tremendously, like thank you very much, we certainly make mistakes too, or things certainly get damaged in transit as well. It is a very difficult job, especially when you're running through as many SKUs and as many products as you would be at a company like ours. But the best thing I could say, at least, on our end is, when things like that happen, and they do happen, we're on social, we see when they happen from our customers, is our customer support's there. They will always respond to you. So, but yeah, I just kind of want to say that it is a difficult job, and I understand even from our competitors when stuff like that happens, because it happens with us too.
Or air bubbles in applied Mega Drive labels.
Oh no,
that's also something that disturbs me. You have a new cartridge,
yeah,
freshly built, and it has air bubbles behind the label. But I think, Dennis, you told me once it's very difficult to apply them on Mega Drive cartridges.
It is. I have, of course, I have some experience because I put out some Mega Drive releases on my own, and the sticker is the most difficult thing on them because you have to apply it, and it can happen.
Also,
yeah.
It's also, a lot of customers are collectors as well, and they demand immaculate. It has to be perfect, right? So, there's a lot of things that can happen, but making sure you get your packaging right is very important.
Yep, and that's the hard thing too. Is like when you go through manufacturing of anything, manufacturing alone, it is impossible for everything to be perfect. It's just impossible. And there's the human element of everybody going through as many products as they're going through. There will always be oversights. There's no way to perfect that down to a point that nothing ever happens. And then when you're past that step, you have to move on to distribution. And that's a whole new set of variables that can mess with your product that, in transit. So it is challenging to solve for all of these different variables when you are, as Dimitris said, you're serving to a lot of collectors that demand a certain amount of quality to what gets sent to them, and it is not the easiest thing in the world. Like I got a vinyl here today actually that was sent to me. I got a Van Halen vinyl that showed up to me today, and it's like all completely bent. This is how it came in the mail. And like if we sent out something like that, I got this from just a regular big box store. They don't care. They're just serving to your average American. Nobody doesn't care. The customer doesn't really care all that much. But our customers certainly have high expectation, and they would not accept something coming through like that. And we have to, we have to do everything we can to ensure it happens as infrequently as possible. And two, when it does happen, and it will happen, you have to be prepared to make it right. And that's something that I think personally we do a very good job of. We will take back items from people when there is the tiniest crease in it if they are upset about it. So, we will do those exchanges. So that's the best you can do is make it right for them if they're upset.
Now there's something we didn't talk about. I mean, we talked about freedom when it comes to improve a game or something. But how about freedom regarding what special items you put in a box edition? For example, the black box version of Maniac Mansion for the NES.
So that's again, it's another product by product basis. So sometimes a partner comes to us and they are very set and adamant. They know exactly what they want to be in a collector's edition. And our job for those projects is basically just to make sure, can we do what they want? Can we source everything they want? And can we do it within budget? And that's how we handle those kinds of deals. On the flip side, there are times that partners come to us and they say, you pitch us, like I remember when we worked on Doom Eternal, which is one of my favorite games of all time. Doom Eternal is my personal favorite shooter ever made. But when we worked on Doom Eternal, I got to be involved with, what went into that, because Bethesda was more like, well, what do you guys think? Why don't you pitch us on what should be in here? And so those ones are cool, because then it's, we sit down and say, well, what is our budget? What do we think is, the most exciting possible ideas we could do? And then we figure out from there what, whether it's the things that are the most affordable or the most realistic or whatever. And we pitch it back and forth with the partner until we come to something that we both agree with.
Awesome. Is there a game or release you wished you would have gotten, but didn't? If you can talk about it, of course.
It's a tough question to answer because for me, it's usually NDA, right? So I can't really say, but you may have something, Joe. I don't know.
The answer is absolutely yes, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to say what.
Okay. Maybe 20 years from now, I'll write a book. Jorg, how about that?
Yeah. It just feels like the kind of thing that I could answer that question in a very just genuine, sincere way, just being, personable about it. And it could be misconstrued so much as something that I'm like trying to throw shade or like, whatever. Yeah. It feels like the kind of thing that just wouldn't be smart to answer.
No problem. Well, I mean, you answered more than I ever could have wished for, I mean, I see you didn't really do a lot of interviews personally recently. So I'm really glad we are sitting down today and talking about all those things, especially since you're, especially since, as we touched as you mentioned, there are some backlashes from other YouTubers or people on Twitter. So of course you always must be very picky on who to talk with, to have
I mean, from my and you guys know this is the second time I've been on. I'm more than happy to talk to people most of the time. It's usually I'm just really busy, like this year has been extremely busy with work. So it's not something that I have the opportunity to do as much as I would like to. But I'm always open to chat if I have availability.
I'm the same way too. Just it's busy, right? But the reality is, the only situation I would be in where I don't want to talk to somebody is if I feel like you're trying to approach a conversation with myself or someone on my team, like even if you're approaching Dimitris and not me, right? If it feels like you are trying to invite us into a conversation and the intent is to build a narrative and not have a conversation, then obviously I would be wary of things like that, because sometimes it could feel like people want you to talk to them just to trap you into saying something or twisting your words or whatever. Like it happens, right? That's about the only situation that I would be like, I'm not really, comfortable with this. But 9 times out of 10, I love talking to people. It's just a matter of we're busy. We're trying to make cool shit. So, and making this cool stuff, it takes a lot of time.
Interesting. I think that was actually our final question, Jörg. About what is your general relationship with the press? You already mentioned there are some journalists who wants to try to build a narrative and trap you into something. Did this happen quite often, or what?
No. That answer doesn't come from like personal experience. It just comes from like not being naive and being on the internet, right? Like I witness the way press or like YouTubers or whatever can act sometimes, and it's just I've seen enough of it to know some people are looking for trouble and some people are looking for a conversation, and you just kind of be picky about who you're going to talk to if it seems like they're just interested in making trouble.
Let's see.
I mean, it can also be the other way around. I mean, Dennis joined us as a PR assistant when we did our watermelon interview, and people were like, the interview was staged and so on. I'm like, no, it wasn't. and people were totally attacking us. Like, how could you invite him for an interview? How would you even talk to him?
It was like they thought it was like a sponsored interview or something. Where there was you guys kind of had arranged it. With some type of money exchange or something. Yeah.
I don't know, but it was super wild, It was like, no, not really, not really. But this is how it is, People always jump to conclusions, And I see as a certain YouTuber or influencer, as you say nowadays,
I hate that word, by the way. I can't. I despise that word, influencer. Yep. I really, really do.
It's very common here in Germany to call people influencers who are in the internet.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did we get here?
There's nothing more dystopian than the reality that we live in, that influencers have so much control. We're living our nightmare.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I mean, the only left thing for you as LRG is now arcade release, because you seem to have covered all other platforms already.
I want them to remake the Capcom Minicute arcade cabinet back here. So
yeah,
let's make it happen.
Cool.
We'd be crazy enough to do it.
I'll
but the problem is we demand that it be as accurate as possible. So we'd end up with an extremely expensive product. So that like 5 people would buy, but man, those 5 people would be really happy.
I mean, you never know. I remember back in the day when Unholy Knight was released for the Super Nintendo, and I think it was a beat 'em. Well, no, in English you say a fighting game, and it was one of the games for the Super Nintendo.
I know what you're talking
the Super
about.
Nintendo didn't have a real release for a lot of time, and I remember it took 8 weeks for Amazon to ship it to me, and so Amazon USA, by the way. And I was calling them, and they told me we didn't order enough. We didn't order enough from the publisher. We didn't expect so many people would order it. So you never know. Sometimes perhaps a release is more successful than you think at the beginning.
That's fair.
Yep, that's true.
One thing that would interest me, because Joe, you mentioned you had the same experience at the beginning of limited run games. Games were sold out within 5 minutes on the homepage. I literally remember that, like, oh, this game sounds nice, and 5 minutes later, sold out. What did change inside, or how did the company change that now you have a pre-order window and you don't have the problem of being left behind anymore?
So I think that's also one of those things that just the answer is incredibly simple, right? There's never been anything nefarious about how we did limited titles before or how we do them now. It was done the way it was done before, out of necessity. We ordered the print runs in the quantity that we did out of financial necessity. The company was very small. It started with very little amount of money, and that was at the time the way the business made sense to run. At a certain point, we got to a point where it became financially viable to do things in a pre-order window fashion. And the side benefit of that is that you make more people happy, right? Like, we still have a limited release, but it's limited to a window of time instead of a quantity. Now, we still do have some things that are quantity limited, and there's always like a reason behind something like that. It's always a boring business financial, like budget reason behind why something is limited now, and it's always something like a collector's edition. And it can very much be like, hey, the only way this CE is viable is if we order things in this quantity. If we go below or above that quantity, it changes these prices in a way that no longer makes sense, and we stand to lose money instead of make money. We are a business. We have to make money. So yeah, I know it's not again, from Dimitris, I know it's not a sexy answer, but the answer is like, it's just how things had to be done at the time. And as soon as we were financially, it was viable for us to do it in a way that was a lot more customer friendly. I mean, we turned to that model and we stuck to it, and we've stuck to it for years. The vast majority of the company's history has been open pre-order model now. The everything is a limited batch model was only the first couple of years of the company, and it's funny that we still have so much reputation from that, right? There are still people, we still see comments all the time of somebody saying like, oh, I would love to get this game from Limited Run, like this game, but Limited Run's doing, it's just going to sell out in 5 minutes, so I can't get it anyway. And it's like, well, where have you been for the past 4, nearly 5 years now? Like, that's not how it works, and it hasn't worked that way for years. But somehow that reputation persists.
Do you do something against scalpers who are selling it for overpriced?
We have always combated scalpers as much as we possibly can. There's obviously just like an extent to which you can do it, and it used to be more of a problem than it is now. Excuse me again, I'm sorry. To my understanding, scalping is not really something we have much of an issue with anymore these days. It's always going to be something. But back when our products were more limited, or more regularly limited, it was more of a problem. Now, the reality is some people are going to get through. But, let's just throw a random number out there, right? Like, say 5 things get scalped and turned around and put up on eBay or whatever. The customer doesn't know behind the scenes the literally hundreds of bots or scalpers that we identified and stopped, right? The few that get through are the only ones that people can see and form any sort of a narrative on, but nobody knows to what extent and how much we stopped scalping. And I can't speak in extreme detail about it because I wasn't the one involved with it, but Josh always took it extremely seriously, and it can be super disheartening when you see the scalper narratives and stuff like that. I think the biggest thing we can do to combat the idea that we ever condoned or were okay with scalping is the fact that we opened up our own retail store, and we have games that we put in stock at our retail store that sometimes go for hundreds of dollars on the secondary market, and we put them in our own retail store for the original MSRP that we sold them at. Or when we are at a PAX or Portland Retro or something like that, every product you see, you could literally go 2 booths down from our booth and see some Shantae game, some Shantae CE for $600, and you come back to our booth and it is the original MSRP that it was. Like, my best answer to how we feel about scalping is I think that should be the narrative. We have never, through our own institution, embraced the idea that our games have become more valuable than our MSRP. We always sell them at our MSRP, and that's something we won't compromise on.
And there's no need, because now you don't have 5 minutes. You have like 2 months for pre-order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it depends on the title, but it's usually somewhere between 4 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, so there's no reason to be troubled. And as a customer, I know you send out a lot of reminder emails, like, don't forget to pre-order.
It's because we're trying to be friendly. We don't want you to forget.
Yeah.
To buy something from us.
There's a lot of video games coming out all the time, so we just want to make sure that you didn't forget.
Sure you don't forget about us over here with that video game that you might spend your money on.
I'm very thankful that you answer all those questions, even though they're not all development focused. But perhaps let me ask one to Dimitris. How is it for you now to develop for limited run games full time? Is it different from other developing shops, or you are basically working now full time for limited run games. Is it different from what you how you thought it would be, or is it better?
It's not really any different than I thought. So Joe and I have worked together for many years before I came on full time. So we started working together in 2019. So really the workflow that we've had has always really been the same. We have scaled up the team, so we have more people on, and we do have, weekly meetings and stuff like that. But generally speaking, Joe just leaves me alone to write code and checks in with me, every morning, and we meet once a week. And that's kind of the way that we kind of work together. So it's been great, it's something that is really good. And another reason why I love working at LRG is because everyone gives you the tools and the ability to be successful. No one is trying to pull you down or create roadblocks for you. They just want you to get, and Joe was talking about before, everyone at LRG does really cool stuff. And I think that's something that is kind of really promoted within the company. So, from my perspective, I'm very, very happy with the way that I do things, and I always have been. And look, like I said, we work very well together, and the team works extremely well together as well.
That's something that we try and cultivate here, right? Is this like my experience at the company? I said, like, we get left with a lot of trust and freedom to do things here, right? And my experience at the company was this feeling of trust that I don't require someone over my shoulder all the time. I don't require constant supervision. I know what my job is, I know what my responsibilities are, and I'm trusted to do them. And that seems like such a novel concept, but like there are so many places you could work that's not how you're treated. And it's so nice to be treated that way in this kind of environment that I think, if anything, it makes you want to try harder. It makes you want to do more because you are being trusted and respected, with the things that you're good at. So as the Carbon team grew, that was really the culture of it that I tried to keep, was how I felt in the greater scheme of Limited Run. I wanted everyone who works in my department to feel exactly the same way. So I try to stay, hands off isn't the right word, but I try to back off and let the people that I brought on, that I hired, I try to let them do the things that they're good at, because that's why I hired them. That's why Dimitris is here. I know how talented he is. I know how motivated he is. And I don't need to breathe down his neck to make that happen. You know what I mean? He works on his own, and we all enjoy what we're doing. And every member of the team is only really micromanaged in a sense to deliver to them all the tools that they need to get something done. That's just the kind of environment that I think is healthy to work in, and I think that's important.
Interesting thing is, after we had the interview released with Dimitris, people were commenting that we should have you returning to talk more about your cracker days.
Well, we should grab Audie and maybe come back at some point and chat about that, because I think he's got some really good stories of the old cracking days. But yeah, I mean, I was never anyone that was actually in the scene, right? But I kind of followed along with it very, very closely. So I'm always interested. You guys know, like I love knowing how stuff works. You know what I mean? Whether that is how security gets defeated or how games get cracked and stuff like that. It's just the more knowledge that I can kind of take in about video games in whatever capacity that may be. I'm always listening. I'm always interested in learning more about.
Question, by the way, I sent you an email after our interview about the Dragon Slayer Amiga version of the arcade release that we had in Germany, because I remember during the interview you couldn't think that there was a version that was controlled by an Amiga. And I think the day after our interview I sent you a link where a version was sold on eBay, but I never heard back. I don't know if you saw it or not.
I will take a look through my email. I apologize. Sometimes I don't have a chance to go through everything. I get a ton of emails to my kind of MVG account.
All good.
But I will take a look, and I will also say that Randy Linden, who works on our Carbon team, did the Amiga version of Dragon's Lair. So I may ping him as well and see if he knows about awesome. the European Laserdisc version. That'd be interesting.
I mean, it would be nice to make a follow-up talking about those old days. I mean, if people are available, if you want to even, because I know some people are like, cracker, that's more illegal. I don't want to talk about it, But honestly, who cares anymore? What went down?
The statute of limitations has long passed, right? So we can talk about the old days of cracking games on the C64 and the Amiga.
Yeah. Nobody will sue anyone for this anymore.
It's definitely a past, art form that is no longer around, because we have these sophisticated DRM, and I'm getting off to a side tangent, so I apologize, but we, sophisticated DRM, always online, live services. Really, ownership is now truly with the company, the publisher, and they have not complete control, but they have a lot of control over a lot of the games that you see these days. So the concept of cracking games is not really a thing that's really done anymore. Obviously, it's an art form that has kind of come and gone, I think.
Yeah.
Joe, you wanted to add something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, talking about this kind of stuff is what led Dimitris to me finding him, because I followed his channel because he talked about this kind of stuff. So that's why when this job opportunity came up, he was literally the first person I contacted when I was interested in starting Carbon. So it's like, absolutely talk about this stuff. It's super interesting to hear about. It's not only do I believe it's not a detriment to you to talk about it. I think it's a huge benefit to tell people that this stuff, that you're interested in this stuff. It makes you extremely valuable to very specific, applications, right?
I think from my perspective, we talk about video game preservation, not presentation, which is very, very important. As we know, we're all kind of big believers in preserving video games. But I think there's also something to be said about preserving the other side of video games, the cracking side, the demo scene, the scene, the underground stuff, right? Because that is history, and there's a lot of these old sites that you can still kind of pull pieces from archive.org about scene groups and stuff, but a lot of those stories are starting to get lost. So and I talked about this on our previous interview, I think, but I want to talk about stories about video games that aren't just let's plays or about the game itself. I want to talk about like more of the human side as well. So hopefully I'll keep doing those things in future, because I think it's really cool stuff to talk about.
Awesome. So perhaps we'll make a follow-up and talk more about the
tracking side. Yeah, we can definitely do that. I'd be more than happy to come back and chat with you guys.
Now, actually, you tipped into another side question. Now that limited run games is starting to do more, you mentioned it, Game Boy Color release, NES releases. What's your opinion about people who will dump the ROMs for preservation? And there will definitely people reselling it on AliExpress and stuff. So,
me personally, I kind of expect that our games are going to get dumped and data mined and extracted, and the ROMs are going to get taken out. I don't really care, to be honest. So, there's always going to be a situation where someone's going to make a bootleg of a game. I personally don't feel like we have any control over that. But Joe, please tell me your thoughts. I personally kind of expect that's going to happen. So
that's complicated. I have a complicated feeling with that. So personally, not only am I with Dimitris, I expect people to dump anything that we put out, especially when it changes to it. Like Trip World DX is absolutely going to get dumped. I have nothing but respect in belief in the idea of dumping and archiving and stuff like that. It becomes complicated when you talk about the people that take the ROMs and do bootlegs of them, because I don't necessarily feel like what they're doing in that point is acting in the space of preservation or something like that. But at the same time, that's a little complicated. It's because they're not doing bootlegs and doing them in any sort of way that financially supports the original publisher or developer of that content in any way, right? It's just them taking something that doesn't belong to them and making money off it, and that's complicated. Like I part of me kind of doesn't care, but there also is that part of me that like this is, this is now something that has been distributed again, and there is somebody who owns it, and I like seeing original developers and publishers supported, giving them an avenue to actually like put out their content again and be supported by it. Because if they couldn't, sometimes this content would never happen. Like Trip World DX literally wouldn't exist if we didn't provide an avenue to distribute it commercially, right? Commercially.
Yeah.
So
I want to.
It's complicated.
Yeah, Joe's right, and I want to add to that as well. One of the things that we do with our releases is it's about the games, but it's also more than the games, right? So if you've seen, our Carbon releases, we add a lot of extras to our games. We kind of want to offer a really nice curated experience for our customers, right? And if you're playing on Xbox or PlayStation, you get trophies, right? You get achievements. So if you kind of extract the ROM out of our packaging, you're losing that experience. You're not getting that experience. At the end of the day, it's just you're playing an emulator and a ROM, right? So I feel like the packaging and the product that we build kind of speaks for itself. So if you do want to take the time out to take the ROM out of our game, then feel free, I guess. But I also feel like, there's definitely an illegal kind of bootlegging side where people are doing that and selling things. That's definitely not cool. But I also feel like you're losing 80% of what makes our game so special in that regard, because you're just taking one piece out of it and essentially just kind of leaving the rest, behind.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but one thing I wanted to say, just to jump into that, real quick. The thing is, if you concentrate on retro consoles, it could also go wrong. Let's for example talk about Paprium for a second. The Watermelon Games engineered the cartridge of Paprium so complicated that it doesn't really run on certain versions of the Mega Drive anymore. It just crashed on booting.
So I will say that I did pre-order Paprium and I never got my copy of it. So I don't really know what happened there. But I've heard stories that it's very, very incompatible with different Genesis versions. There's obviously a lot of different Genesis revisions out there. So that must be something that is very difficult to manage. I don't really know the ins and outs of why that's the case, because I never got my game. So still a little better about it, to be honest. So.
Yeah, sorry that I mentioned it, but I just thought it was a prime example,
I think there's like something else that we didn't really touch on too when we talk about all that stuff, and that's an additional layer to what makes all this stuff so complicated is you talk about things like dumping and redistributing and essentially just piracy, right? The idea that four of us are sitting here today talking about retro games in any capacity is because of piracy. That's what makes a lot of this stuff kind of complicated when you work for a game publisher and have to sit and talk about piracy. Is this content would not be in our collective consciousness. We would not be thinking about NES games and Game Boy games today in the same way if those entire libraries had not been pirated and redistributed for decades. That's how they lived on. That was the ultimate form of preserving those games, at least in the public mind, right? That was the ultimate form of making them accessible, at least long enough for people to be talking about them, right? Like we talked about accessibility before, where for a lot of people, accessibility ends at what's available on the eShop of their personal gaming device, right? But for enough people, those ROMs being accessible was enough to keep you talking about something like Super Mario RPG for 20 years, long enough to get Nintendo to say, you know what, we'll work this out. We'll make a remake, So it's the part that piracy plays in even keeping the desire for this kind of stuff around, you have to respect it, and it just makes everything complicated.
Awesome. Well, from my side, we got it covered so far. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.
You
Bye.
too.